amazing people to the show today. Want to thank everyone who figured out the time adjustment and the scheduling and has joined us. We're going to start off today talking about our careers, and we're going to take more of an IT career focus because that's where our background is. And there's always this debate. Should I work corporate or should I go into consulting? And every one of us has had our time from both arenas, and we're going to talk through some of the challenges, some of the advantages of those decisions. So if you have questions, if you have scenarios you'd like us to answer, please add those into the comments. We will be happy to address it. For everyone who is viewing outside of HAPS, we should be able to see most of your comments, but you won't be able to see anything I type in and reply, but we'll try and address those through the discussion. And I'd like to start off with an introduction from the wonderful Jennifer Forrest, or Jenn Forrest. We actually met through the conference circuit where Jenn was brilliant, engaged, but not quite ready to step up on stage and start speaking and sharing her expertise. And in an amazingly short period of time, she has gone from shy and super competent, at least as I saw in the sessions, to one of our top presenters at project management and business analysis conferences in the US and Canada. So Jenn, a little more about yourself.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenn Forrest, and I'm here in Washington, D.C. Can I give a little bio background about why we're having this conversation? Awesome. So I started my career in consulting, and then I've done 2 corporate stints so far in my career. So I've gone consulting, corporate, consulting, and now I'm back to corporate, and I'm really excited to talk with what I've learned, what you shouldn't do. So like learn from my mistakes and some pros and cons of both.
Fantastic. And yet another wonderful person I met through the conference circuit is Miss Jennifer Bedell. She is from the very frozen land, had an opportunity to meet in some of the Canadian events, and have always been impressed with her presentations, with her thought knowledge, and again has moved into become one of the highly sought after speakers across chapters, other events. And if you look at the project Business Analyst World and Project Management Summit website that's run by Miss Amy Waddell, you may remember from a previous segment. There are going to be, we have hopefully scheduled events for the fall that will be live events, including Orlando, and the venue is amazing. You don't want to miss that. Plus, it's Orlando and everyone wants to get out of town. So, Jenn, a little bit about how you came to be here and your background.
And my background. All right. I'm going to go way back to even before consulting, because I think I kind of went corporate consulting. But I started on the business side in an insurance company and got into business analysis when they were upgrading their systems. And they said, hey, Jenn, you're kind of technical. Why don't you go and talk to these guys, work on the project team? So I think my very first meeting on that, I prevented some scope creep, which was pretty awesome. I didn't even know what scope creep was then. So that was cool. It was like, let's change the process instead of changing the system. Hello. I went from there when my insurance company that I was working for was purchased by a very large global insurance company, and then they outsourced their IT. So I went over to CGI, which was consulting. But the consulting I did there was more in-house. So I was working from the same desk, working for different clients, but I didn't actually go to a client site. However, it did give me the experience of billable hours and understanding the consulting world. Now, then I went back into corporate, and just recently, actually 1 year ago tomorrow, I will be with my current consulting company for 1 year. So
fantastic.
That's where I am.
Well, and you know, by corporate, what we're generally talking about is working for a company, working with their products and services, and not being in an IT service company. Of course, everyone has their customers and vendors that we deal with, but really it's two sides, because when we work for a company, we end up working with outsource partners or third-party vendors or COT systems or even consulting companies. And it always looks so wonderful. Like, I wish I had your job and these high salaries, and it looks so wonderful. And then if you're working for one of these contractors or service providers or consulting, you're like, boy, do I miss the stability of 40 or 50-hour weeks and benefits and retirement and all these great things. You're like, maybe I should go back. So throwing that back to you, what are some of the things that you really loved and enjoyed on the consulting side? And what were some of those things that, maybe weren't your favorite?
I'll go first.
All right.
So on the consulting side, I think the pace, I both liked and didn't like at times, right? Like, some points in my life, the pace was awesome. Working the gazillion hours a week, because you do your billable work, like Jen was saying, and then you have to check your emails and make sure your timesheets are in and do any company initiatives and figure out what your next role is going to be and keep learning and up to date on the best practices or whatever it is, and do all this other stuff too. So it's definitely a lot of hours and the pace is intense, but it's also, you are learning intensely as well. Some other things is, with consulting, you're more distanced from the work and the product, and that gives sometimes a level of objectivity to be able to see things objectively and see areas of improvement without having to improve yourself, right? Like you do on the business side. But there are more politics, I think, in consulting, because there's a lot more relationships to manage. There's a lot more stakeholders. It's also harder to get honest feedback, right? Because if you're asking for feedback, usually it's like your VP of whatever is asking for feedback from their VP of whatever, and it's very formalized, right? You can't get just like, hey, how did you think I did about X, Y, and Z? Or how do you think that meeting went? But people sometimes are a little bit hesitant to give you that feedback that I really value. So I feel like on the business side, that's a little better. Also in consulting, sometimes you don't have control over where you go or what role you're placed in, and sometimes it's not a good fit. And that doesn't mean that your client isn't a good client. It's not, it's not personal. It just means that sometimes you're put in a position that you're like, am I adding the most value here? Is this what I want to be doing? Maybe not. Versus business side, you have selected that role most of the time. You have selected that role. You're like, this is what I want to be doing. This is how I want to be doing it, etc. So those are some of the pros and cons I see so far. And Jenn Bedell, I realized that we have more parallels in our background, because I also worked for an insurance company and I also worked for CGI.
Oh, wow. I did not realize that. So it's the whole double N thing, maybe.
Yep.
Awesome. So where the parallels kind of switch a little, though, is my experience with consulting. So I did work for CGI, but like I said, it was back then. It was an internal part of CGI, so we were taking clients in, and we had what we called our global delivery center. So we were all working here and bringing the work into the center, as opposed to us going out to a client site. So I understand the concept and the way that things worked with CGI was that you did have to have your 8 hours a day billable. Anything that you did for internal was on top of that. Now, where I am now, we're talking Maritimes, Atlantic Canada, where everybody knows everybody. Like, I know Bob, right? And Jim. But it's a smaller company. And I'm actually working for a small client as well. So I'm in a local company for a local client. And it's a very different experience. I do have some say in where I go, what clients I work on. I'm asked before my name is sent out anywhere. And then I have the final say in the end. At least that's how it was before I joined the company. So I'm assuming it's going to be the same so far. That's been my experience. And when it comes to the billable time, we are just putting together a program now. It's been up and running for a couple of months, a business analyst community within the consulting company where the time that you put toward that community is treated as billable time. So we are paid for that time, we are compensated for it, and it's the incentive to have people engaged with the company, which is only going to make us better because we're learning from each other. So I think that's where things are a little bit different from your recent experience to my current experience with consulting.
That's tremendous. It's really good to see. And you know, everyone may pick up the theme along the way that you can work for good or bad companies, whether they're the service provider or whether they're the service recipient. You know, that is a whole nother thing on its own, that nobody likes to work for a bad company. And for anyone who's just joining us, we are talking about the differences in the career strategy around working for a single company or working for a consulting or service provider where your primary work is helping other companies directly. What about working for a company? You know, we definitely know there's a stability, and certainly in most cases the benefits are a lot better. They have a lot better benefit packages. What are some of the things you loved and hated when you spent time working for a company or working the quote corporate job? We'll reverse it. Miss Bedell, you want to take the lead on this one, and then we'll spin it back?
Sure. So with corporate, it's that sense of belonging all day long. So everything I do is part of who I am throughout the day. Whereas with consulting, I'm spending most of my time with my client, and I kind of sort of belong there, but I really belong somewhere else, and then I'm trying to kind of fit into both places. And I feel like I'm kind of trying to balance between those two, plus whatever I'm doing on the side and at home. With corporate, this is my life. Now, contrary to the long hours thing that Jenn experienced in consulting, I found the long hours in my most recent corporate position. You're not compensated for it, but the work still has to be done. So I was working more hours actually in corporate. I think the other advantage though to corporate is all of the other kind of extracurricular things. It's developing that teamwork. Yes, there are more politics, but you're not constantly making sure you're putting on your best face. Whereas in consulting, there's an extra layer of needing to put on your best self. You can kind of be a little bit more relaxed on the corporate side. Jenn, thoughts?
Yeah, that makes sense. My top one was about the teamwork, and you put it so beautifully with the sense of belonging. I was trying to before this, I was trying to like think about how to articulate that, and I just that was like, wow, yes, the belonging, right? It's like being a part of a team, working on a specific thing, really knowing that you're making an impact, right? And like knowing that you're all in it together as well. There's something special about that. I think so. You can also potentially be more of a Jill of all trades, right? So you can get into things that maybe you don't have expertise in, and you can say, hey, I don't really have expertise in this, but I want to try it out. Versus if you're in a consulting role, you always have to be the expert. Like you were saying, you always have to have your face on, kind of thing. Mm-hmm. I think relationships are different, not better or worse, but like relationships when you're in corporate and you're in that team structure, it's different. I think there's potentially more like individual contributor or autonomy in the consulting side of things versus the corporate. It's more about teamwork as well. And I was also thinking, in some ways, it's easier to be more vulnerable and establish like psychological safety in a corporate environment versus a consulting environment, because you don't have to always have your best foot forward, always have that face on. So,
and is this where we introduced the whole imposter syndrome
yes.
concept? Because I will say, and I'm sorry, Hans, if I'm stealing your next question.
Go right ahead.
Okay. It took me a long time to make the leap from corporate to consulting because I never felt that I had enough experience or enough diversity in my skills. I never thought I had enough. And once I made the leap and I got into a client site, I realized that they think I'm an expert. And I realized that what I did bring actually was a lot of skills that I just didn't realize I had because I didn't have the opportunity to showcase them. So I found that just simply being a consultant, and there is that expectation that you're an expert, gives you the confidence.
I've heard the saying, a year in consulting is worth 2 in industry. And I was wondering if that's about, I don't know if necessarily that's true or not, first of all. But 2, I'm wondering if that's more about the confidence building, as well as maybe the exposure, and like you're forced to really know what you're talking about. So maybe you go above and beyond to research and talk about things and get that exposure. But I wanted to hear your thoughts, Jen, about that.
Yeah, I've never heard that, but I would agree with it because it's the multitude of projects, and it is. If you want people to believe you're an expert, you're going to be constantly honing your skills. I'm listening to podcasts, Mastering Business Analysis with Dave Sabo. Had to throw it out there. Still my favorite podcast. That gives me the confidence because I'm constantly, it's always up to date. It's always new stuff. Going to conferences. You have that incentive to continue to develop yourself, and therefore, I guess I would agree. I mean, I'm going to take it back a little bit because I did that when I was in corporate anyway. But I think in consulting, you have more incentive to keep doing it.
Yeah, as you were talking, I was thinking like, oh, like what are the things I'm doing for learning? And I think the difference is right now in my corporate role is I'm learning about specific problems, right? Like right now I'm learning about agile metrics. So I've been reading textbooks on agile metrics, right? For like specific problems and like how to tactically implement things, right? Versus in the consulting world, I was more learning about like ideas and more strategic things than tactical things. Do you find that to be the case as well, Jen?
I think it's a mix. I've been on the same client since I started. And again, that's good for the confidence too, because it started as a 3-month contract. So, here I am a year in and still going. So in terms of what, I think I'm on a client now where there is a little bit of both, and they're wanting me to also help grow their BA skills. So I'm getting to do a little bit of both and getting into kind of both sides of it, which is my favorite place to be when you talk about strategic and tactical, and then what's that middle layer?
It's called missing.
Anyway, that's where I like to be, right in the middle.
Well, when you think about it, if a company is hiring a contractor or a consultant, they have high expectations. So I think part of that is you just can't hide in consulting. You have to be on, whatever they throw at you, you're expected to be better than them or able to get it done. Whereas in corporate, you don't have to hide, and you could learn a lot and you could be just as productive, but it's very easy to hide. And the bigger the company, the easier it is. And I think that's where it came in. Barb Karkenard, another, pioneer in the BA space, said, do you really have 15 years of experience, or do you have the same year of experience 15 times? And I've seen this way too many times in corporate where someone says, I have 15 years. I'm like, no, you don't. You've been doing the same thing for 15 years. You haven't grown. You haven't mastered anything. And with some of the companies I'm advising now, I have people saying, I'm a senior, whatever the role is. I'm an expert in this because I've been doing this for 5 years. And I'm like, you still don't even know what you don't know. Like, at the beginning, both of you said, we have this lack of confidence. And Jenn Bedell said, I have this lack of confidence going out and consulting. And no matter how much I kept trying to poke her with a pointy stick or a laser pointer and saying, you know this, you're better than you think you are, I always know that I'm an idiot and that I don't know what I'm doing. But usually I know a bit more or can figure it out faster than other people. So it really doesn't matter where I go. The more I do this, the more I'm like, wow, there's so much I don't know and I need to know, and there's so few times. So tying on to the imposter syndrome, what are some of the moments where you felt that career validation? That moment, because both of you have actually taken the step to share your expertise, to get on stage and present and do webinars and come here as two experts in this area. What were some of those moments where you finally realized, you know what? I am good. I can be confident. I know I don't know everything, but I can value what it is I bring to the table, and that's enough.
I'm going to jump in first on this one if I can. Is that okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Because the answer was like screaming at me as you were saying that. And it was watching other people come to me saying, I'm interested in business analysis. Can you tell me what it's about? And within months, those people landing a job as a business analyst. And one of them continuing to grow and is now in a manager position after only a few years. He tries to attribute that to me. Maybe I gave him the confidence to start, but he did all the work. Yet for me, that's where I thought, okay, well, people are coming to me and something that I'm saying or doing is helping.
I don't have as good of an answer as that because that was amazing. But mine is that I've solved some problems that people are asking about, or I've had the same problems as other people, and I can approach how I attempted to solve them and what worked and what didn't, right? And then they don't have to go through the same painful mistakes that I've made. Although we learn the best by failing, right? So we want to fail fast and learn lots.
I think it is the wise person learns from their mistakes. The genius learns from the mistakes of others. And we're out there sharing all of our mistakes so that everyone else won't continue to stick the butter knife into the electrical outlet.
Yeah.
So
can I tell you all about one of the mistakes I made with transitioning between corporate and consulting?
Yes, please.
Okay. So I spent my first, I think 5 years of my career at the same consulting company and did a variety of different things. Had some internal experiences, had some external experiences, worked on help desk, did a lot of different things. And then I realized, okay, I've been here for 5 years. I want to see what else is out there in this world of ours. So I started applying for a pretty well-known consulting firm. And they had this recruiter who was like, you've only worked at one company consulting, and that company specializes in federal work. I live in Washington, D.C. That's what Washington, D.C. is about. And they're like, you really need to have more commercial experience. to do consulting. And I really wanted to work for that consulting company at the time. And I also thought that was like the advice, right? A recruiter is telling me something, it must be true. They wouldn't say things to trick me up or whatnot. So I was like, okay, I really need commercial experience. So because like my career is going to drown without commercial experience. This is a huge gap. Everything is terrible. What am I doing with my life? So I got a commercial job. And that was a really good experience. And then I realized that I wanted to go back to consulting. So I went actually back to that firm and I was like, hey, I've now spent, I think, 2 years doing commercial work. I filled this gap that you told me I had. And they were like, what? And they were like, that recruiter is no longer with our company.
Well, and talking about knowing your audience, the laziest recruiters are looking to just check the boxes on the job description, and they don't understand the roles. They don't care what it is. They're just trying to push as many people into openings as they can. And if someone matches closer to what they're asked for, they think it's going to be easier to push them in that position. And Dina asked us, she's watching on Facebook, that so we've got all these experiences. Maybe we spend 2 years that you did in corporate, or 5 years, or 10 years with some group. How do we show that we've grown and developed? So how do you show your growth? How have you better tried to market yourself and shown how many different areas, how well you could potentially help your prospective employers and bring value to their customers as well?
I think the number one thing is the change for me was when one of my mentors, Asama, he was like, tell me about what you're proudest of in your different roles, right? And like with that 5-year experience, talk about your different roles, talk about what you're proudest of and measure it, right? And then I did that, and then job searching was very different because I was telling the story and I was showing the measurements behind the story as well. So one of those stories was actually on my first commercial / corporate stint. I cleaned up a backlog of production support issues that had been around for about 3 years. And I did that in a couple months with some systematic approaches. So things like that, telling those kind of stories, that's what has worked for me.
I think for me, and my dog may have something else to say about it because he's in the background right now. I would say it's the very first large project I was on. I remember somebody saying to me, you don't realize how much you're learning here until you get on to your next project and start referring back to, well, this is how we did it on that project. And they were exactly right. I still, to this day, that is 15 or more years ago, I still go back and think, well, how did we do it then? And when I get onto a new project and I think, oh, okay, well, here's a problem I need to solve. How have I done it in the past? Or how has it been done in the past? What have other people done? And when I start to realize that I can draw from my own experience rather than Googling, that's how I show that I've grown. I still Google, by the way.
Yeah. Well, and hello, Oscar, in the background too. When we look back, throughout human history, storytelling was one of the dominant ways that we shared knowledge and, taught each other not to put your finger into the fire or you're going to get burned. And I think we lose sight of that because think about any degrees you had. Think about a lot of the classes or the training. How often are they saying that the core of that is being able to tell good stories and learn from the stories of others? And I think we miss that opportunity, not only in our personal growth, but also in how we communicate and tell others. So you mentioned, Jenn, that when you started the new consulting job, one of the first ways you started getting validation was you were telling stories about how you had solved similar problems and introduced and said, this is how we're going to do it here. And then they saw the result, and then it became their stories. So I think we do need to consider and start honing, do we have these little stories that we can tell to help get stakeholders or reluctant developers on our side to get done, or to even know what we need to do in what order?
Yes. Yes. And sometimes you tell the story about how things didn't work. Like, oh, we tried a similar approach to this in my previous team, and it didn't really work out the way we wanted it to. Versus saying, hey, that's a really dumb idea. Those are very different approaches to the same kind of end result, or different end result, but same problem.
As the great Bob Prentice would always say, we want to take risks, but we want to take measured risks. We don't want to engage in career limiting moves, because that is very limiting and very bad.
Although there is that saying that, especially for agile coaches, and I think maybe this is more true for consultants, that if you're not on the verge of being fired, you're probably not doing your job.
Maybe depending on, so I would say in terms of that you should be pushing for change and trying to bring value, absolutely. That you're doing things or acting in a way that is getting everyone mad at you and they don't want to work with you, I might not apply it in that situation. Well, one of the other things is the syndrome, we have the imposter syndrome. So let's jump into the grass is always greener syndrome, especially since spring is coming around the corner.
Yep.
What are the reasons that we think consulting or corporate is the way to go is we're getting frustrated or burnt out with our current employer, or maybe we are just unhappy with and thinking, okay, I'm going to jump all the way to the other side of the fence because those people look happier. So what were some of the indicators? How did you know that it was time to move on, and whether it was time to move on to another company that was similar to your own versus jumping over to the opposite side of the table? How did you decide? What were some of the factors that made you make these decisions in your career?
Honest answer for me, the decision to move on had to do with the situation, the sheer number of hours and expectations, not feeling valued. In terms of where to go, salary. Consulting, I was compensated well. At least I thought I was, and consulting was able to match a close enough salary. But at the same time, I had also been doing these conferences and hanging out with all these people who are consulting, and realizing that is when I was having the most fun, is talking about this stuff in person, having a beer after a conference day and talking about work stuff, that I realized, why am I not doing this as my day-to-day job then? So a couple of things for me.
Which, for the audience, that's how we know each other.
We are in the circle of Amy Riddell, one of the best natural networkers who finds people that have things in common, and they end up becoming friends for life. So I shared earlier in the chat, and I'll share the link again. If you have a chance to attend her events, the virtual ones are great. As we get back to in-personal, it's a whole another experience of being able to meet and share stories in the breaks, at lunch, at the hotel bar every night after every day of the conference, or whatever restaurant the groups are carpooling to. So absolutely take advantage of that. So Ms. Forrest, what were some of the indicators that made you decide to switch, and maybe even consider switching even entire types of work?
So I think the first one I shared was me taking this recruiter's words to heart and basing my career off of them. So don't recommend that, right? Maybe if you are really good friends with a senior recruiter who is in your industry domain, take their words to heart, right? Recruiting is an art, and senior recruiters are artists and amazing and excellent. But just some random recruiter who you've never met and you don't have a relationship with, perhaps don't make career changing moves based on like a couple sentences they say. Just advice there. So that's what not to do. I think later on it was about the roles themselves, right? I always get this kind of gut feeling like, it's time for a change. And then I would look for roles, or the last couple of roles actually have been, someone has approached me about them, which has been awesome as well. And I think that's because of my LinkedIn profile primarily. So keep your LinkedIn profile up to date, because people will come and want to hire you. And it's easier that way. And I wrote a pros and cons list, and then I weighted it. So like staying in consulting or going to a corporate job. And I weighted just like 10 is the best, right? And then, or 10 is the most important to me. 1 is the least important to me. And I listed out everything. Like I would need to change my email to this tool, like everything, right? And then I weighted it, and then I looked at my reaction to the scores. So it wasn't about the scores themselves, it was about my reaction to the scores. And then that gave me a lot of clarity and insight. And I actually have recommended that to someone else who made the decision to switch from consulting into, I think, corporate role. And that decision, pros and cons weighted list, worked for them as well.
I can share my template if you'd like, Jen.
You have a template too?
This is the problem. This is the affliction of dealing with business analysts. They've built tools. They're repeatable tools and processes. They have criteria for decision making.
I use the Fibonacci sequence in my ratings, but yeah.
A little bit more.
I spent most of my. Go ahead.
So one of my best friends was a consulting person, and then her family member told her that she wasn't fun anymore because she was so stressed out, and that was her indication that she needed to move to a corporate position. So sometimes it can be external cues from your loved ones, so your friends and family or whoever you're around, right? How are they feeling about your job? Is your job impacting your personal life, right? And that could be on the consulting life or the corporate life. It really just depends. So is it time for a change for other reasons? And then, sometimes you can make those changes in your current role, and you can make your current role work for you. But sometimes it's also time to move on.
Regardless of which door, go ahead, Jen, add in.
No, you go ahead, Hans. I was looking at the wrong window. Go ahead.
No worries. I was going to tie into more of kind of the closing theme. So finish up this one, and then I'll bring in our next topic.
So the decision-making piece. So just I was going to add on to what Jen said about sometimes you can find it in your current role. And I think that's the thing is it took me 2 years to leave. I knew it was time to leave. I knew I was getting ready for wanting to make that move, but it probably took 2 years before I finally did move, because I was sometimes waiting it out is enough, and org shifts and whatever. But I wouldn't recommend jumping at the first sign of things not being perfect, because they're never going to be perfect anywhere.
Nothing is perfect ever. Yeah, that's absolutely correct.
So, regardless of which direction people want to go, whether they want to just hop companies or they want to hop to opposite sides of the tables, we already mentioned how important storytelling will be to that journey. Being able to take your Jenn and Jenn inspired decision matrix for the 42 facets of career decisions and job placement and running through that template, contact them on LinkedIn. I'm sure they'll share the template with you if you're interested. But also having an updated and current LinkedIn profile is key so that when you are ready to make the move, you have the assets, the stories, the recommendations, the history to make it easier to make that swap. So kind of closing out our discussion, for those who might have to make this decision in the future, what are some of the ways that not only do you prepare when you're considering, but how do you stay prepared in case something might change? You might have to leave. Something might not work. The company might get bought, or as Jenn said with one of hers, it was bought and she was forced into a subsidiary. What are some of the ways that you make sure that you're marketable and ready to go? And as much as you also want to tie into that, how speaking has been part of your personal and professional branding, love to hear your strategies that you can share.
So I don't know if Jen's frozen, or are you good?
I'm good.
Sorry.
You can go first.
All right. I was kind of waiting to see if you were going to talk, and then, so keeping the LinkedIn profile up to date, obviously, keeping the resume up to date. Keeping the resume up to date is twofold. One, it's ready to go as needed, and two, it's always nice to go back and review it yourself when you need a little pick-me-up, because that's your best work, is what you've got on there. Third is about networking and keeping the networking up. Don't wait until you need somebody to reach out to them. Keep in touch with people, offer things to other people so that when the time comes, I mean, not for only that reason, just because I like people anyway, but then when the time comes, it's a lot easier to say, hey, I need a hand.
I think that's all really, really valid. And one thing that I do as well is I keep a little list of accomplishments and compliments that people send me in a OneNote document that I can go back to one, like pump myself up, but then also be like, what were the big things that other people appreciated about my work at such and such a thing. And even if you don't update the descriptions in your jobs in LinkedIn, if you can update your skills, right, attributes, and have some keywords for jobs that you might want to have so people can find you. For example, like Jenn Bedell, if you wanted to, have your next job be as a senior business analyst coaching business analysis or something like that, or coaching something, splitting stories or something specific like that. Mm-hmm. Put those keywords in there, because that's how people search. And you can also generate your resume from LinkedIn. But we are talking about LinkedIn, and I think Leslie Hughes is on the audience, the LinkedIn queen. So shout out to her. And if you have LinkedIn questions, that's who you should go to.
Yep. If you go to Ekman Guides on YouTube, there are 2 interviews where Leslie and I had a chance to talk. That will also, you could pop onto her YouTube channel and her website, which is Punch Media in Canada. She is a LinkedIn branding, and Leslie, you're welcome to throw the link to your site in the comments as well. She is amazing. Those were so great. Amy was on one of the calls where we talked about becoming a speaker as a way of building your personal brand. And really what we're saying here is, there are advantages, and it is great to do a stint in both and to see the work done from both sides of the table and how you can contribute value in both directions. So I really want to thank Jenn and Jenn, both with 2 N's, as I've discovered, for joining tonight, sharing their expertise. If you have a chance to connect with them on LinkedIn, you definitely want to follow their posts and what they're up to. If you have a chance to join any of Amy's conferences, the link was in the HAPS description. They're amazing. You will meet lifelong friends, and it's insane how much you will learn and be able to bring forward and just share your stories with others. So thank you both for joining. I want everyone out there, thank you for watching from whichever medium you have. If there's any future topics, future guests you'd like us to consider, please let me know. We will be back tomorrow, Wednesday, at 5:15 Eastern Daylight Time, PM, with two fabulous guests. We have Stacy and Allison, who have spent a considerable part of their non-available time helping empower women in technology and bring greater diversity to the companies that they're working with. And so they'll be on tomorrow to talk about those efforts. I hope you can make it. Everyone, please stay safe, stay healthy, and good luck to all of you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.